Hey, this is Rosario Streams and welcome to the first episode of That sounded weird. And this is the space where we can all just get together and have a conversation about everything and anything, especially as a Christian who really loves talking about topics that are really out of bounds. If you like those kind of things, then keep on watching. And before we start this episode, I just want to put out a disclaimer. I am not a professional or an expert in any of the topics I bring on this channel. So these are all my views, my opinions, my personal experiences, and maybe some really informal Google research. If you like this kind of content, then please subscribe and click the notification bell. Now, let's get to today's chat. Okay, so I'm starting this chat with a bit of a fake coffee. And I say fake because this is a decaf. I can't have caffeinated anything, especially chocolate, but you know, as a human, I still like having chocolate anyway. And I'm gonna start today by telling you all, I was addicted to sex. Even till now, I still like sex. But how can you be Christian and like sex? I know, it sounds really scandalous, especially given that I'm not married yet. But my Christian faith, specifically in the Catholic Church, has actually really taught me so much about love and sexuality. But it did take me quite a bit of digging to be able to really get to the core of the teachings on love and sexuality and my own understanding of love and sexuality without having the purity talks being shoved at my face. And before we continue, please note, this is not another purity talk. Don't get me wrong, as a Christian, I do think that purity and chastity talks are not that bad. It's just that now they're becoming way overdone. We've already gone through so many talks where we're told not to have sex before marriage and how we should be saving ourselves for marriage and how saving yourself for marriage is such a beautiful thing. But hearing so many talks about what you should be or shouldn't be doing, it can get a bit detrimental to your mental health. I know some of you may not agree with me about that, but hear me out. If you're told not to think about the pink elephant, then what do? Don't lie to me. I know you thought of that pink elephant. It's really hard not to think about the thing that you shouldn't be doing when you are reminded of it so constantly, especially if you are someone like me, someone with an addiction-prone kind of personality. I became addicted to masturbation at the age of 10. I accidentally got into it, and ever since I just found myself doing it every single night. I really can't remember any night during my childhood where I didn't do it at all. And before you go around saying that, oh, Rosario Stream says that masturbating is okay, let me tell you, that's not what I'm saying. This is not a Christian telling you, go ahead, thou shalt masturbate. I deeply believe that masturbation is wrong, but not because I'm Christian, but because of my own personal reasons and from my own experience and so much thinking about it. But that's a whole nother story. If you wanna hear about my thoughts on masturbation, not just as a Christian, but just as a human being, then click the like button and I'll make a video. The reason why I'm bringing up about masturbation is that that was the reality I lived. And that's the reality we're living in. It's a normal thing nowadays. But as a Christian, especially as a Catholic, it was very hard to be able to talk about it, even though that was the reality I lived for the majority of my life. As I grew up, I became extremely interested in relationships and sex. Naturally, when puberty hits you. But especially for me, I had a really big fixation on it because the extent of sexual education I ever got was just one sentence: sex is bad. But that sex lesson really was contradicted by what I was seeing in TV shows and in movies. So much of love was portrayed through sex. And so in the end, I started believing that, well, my deepest desire is to be loved. And it seems that the way to get it is actually through sexuality. So why is it so bad? So that led me to have a bit of an obsession over TV shows and movies that really showed explicit sex scenes. To the point where at the end of my high school years, I actually ended up seeking out pornography and I got hooked quite bad. So by the time I was 18, my sexual addiction escalated from masturbation to pornography, to the point where I just didn't care about whether I would have sex with a guy or not before marriage. But my whole mindset on love and sexuality completely changed when I went to a bioethics talk led by a Catholic doctor who taught me my first ever lesson on sexuality in just one sentence. Sex is the physical expression of love between a married man and a woman, and that ultimate unity creates a new life. It was just that one sentence that got me set off into this journey to find out more about sex and love. And you know what I found? After a lot of research and a lot of reading, a lot of the media portrays love as unequal to sex. But sex and love can't be the same thing, because when you have sex on its own, it doesn't sustain a relationship. But sex is a beautiful profession of love that you can really express to the one person you choose to live with for the rest of your life. For better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, for sick, no, not for sick, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. I learned from that sex is a very beautiful act. It's a very intimate and loving act. And it is a sacred thing that God has created that is actually a good thing. And once I learned more about sexuality, I wanted to experience the fullness of love within that act. So, as I said, I am a Christian, specifically a Catholic, and I still like sex, naturally, because it is a beautiful gift. I will say that I do struggle in the area of sexuality still. I don't have the addictions anymore as I did before, but you know, every now and then, if you have gone through addiction, it's the same as any drug or alcohol addiction. You do have some lapses every now and then. But I am proud to say that I am much more in control of my sexual urges and sexual desires than ever before, because I learned to understand the addiction cycle, my triggers, and most especially my mental health struggles. But before we get to that, I want to address a few comments about Christianity and sexuality. Firstly, there is a difference between someone who doesn't believe in sin and so chooses to do sexual stuff, and someone who believes in sin of a sexual nature but still struggles and feels bad that they struggle in that behavior. Second, not every Christian who struggles with sexual behavior is addicted to sex. Maybe you are a Christian who is struggling with sexual sin and sexual behaviors, and it feels to you that maybe you do have an addiction. But let me tell you, the reason you may feel like it is an addiction is because your mind is probably just extremely consumed with trying to overanalyze and trying to find solutions to stop the unwanted sexual behavior. Remember how I told you about that pink elephant? If you tell yourself, don't think about it, don't think about it, most likely you will think about it constantly. Thirdly, just because you are a Christian that isn't struggling with a sexual addiction, it doesn't mean that you're not going to experience the same kind of shame that someone with a legit sexual addiction does. And lastly, sexuality has no off switch. I think especially with many of us who have grown up with a purity culture, we can tend to fall into the trap of believing that we have to be completely 100% pure in order to be accepted, in order to be approved of, in order to feel like we are worthy of God's love and feel like we do have a dignity. But this is not true at all. Even if you have struggled with sexual sin or a sexual addiction, like for the past 10 or plus years, you are still lovable. You are still worthy in God's eyes because you are a child of God. That's the truth. The reality I feel like the purity culture keeps forgetting to mention is that sexuality is really difficult to tackle, especially when you start engaging in sexual behavior, whether it was on purpose or by accident. It's really hard to just stop because of the crazy brain chemistry that's like going on. And if you're interested about knowing a bit more about that, even just a tiny bit, because I'm not a scientist or whatever, you can have a look at my article down in the description box to get a bit of an idea of why it may be a bit difficult to stop sexual behavior. This is an article that I wrote from my own Google research when I was developing an old ministry of mine. For the past 2 years, I attempted to develop a ministry specifically for Christian women who were struggling with sexual addictions. And through that ministry, I have encountered several women who have gone through similar shame experiences that I have when I was going through my own sexual addictions. But get this, some of these women weren't even addicted to sex at all. But because of the way they were talking about the shame of their own sexuality, it made me realize that there is something missing within our church. Like, I don't know what it's like in other Christian churches, but in my own church, I feel that there's something missing when it comes to the education of our sexuality within the Catholic Church. From my own experiences and from hearing other women's stories, I realized that there are 4 specific things that I feel that Christian education is lacking. I believe that we need more informative sex education. I'm gonna be a bit vulnerable and tell you guys about my extent of sexual education. Not the sex is bad part, but my experience is quite extreme to the point where I was never told about my womanly cycle. My mom is a very loving person. She's very good. The problem is that she never told me about periods. And once I suddenly got my first ever period, I thought I was dying and I was having cancer. And so I went to my mom to show her my bloodied panties. And to my surprise, she was celebrating. She was like, "Oh, congratulations, you're a woman." And I just like hysterically started crying because I didn't know what was happening to me. I'm sharing that experience because I feel that there is a bit of a kind of fear of talking about specifically when it comes to lady stuff. There's a problem when it comes to chatting about our biological workings, in a sense. And I realized that that experience wasn't just a personal thing that I went through, but that other women may have gone through something similar. Like recently, I had a few friends ask me whether scratching my vagina is actually a sin. And it just makes me feel like so surprised. Well, not surprised, because I once thought that too in the past, but it's no more different than scratching your butt. Just do it in your private room, that's all. I'm pretty sure no one likes seeing people scratch their butt, but we all know we do it. And it's just interesting because like so many guys, they just like scratch their crotch like it's nothing new for them, but for women it's so, yeah, like there's something about sexuality and women within the Christian faith especially, that there is some, like, we're very, I have no idea how to describe it, but I can only say that we really need more informative sex education, not in the sense of having sex and stuff, but in the sense of understanding our own biology as women and men also. Gender equality. Please, feminists out there, don't bash me for saying that. I was just kidding. Another thing I believe we need more of is to learn how to accept our own sexual desires without shame. Sexuality is actually a very beautiful thing. Our sexual desires are even more beautiful, because I heard from this man from Fire Up Ministries. He made this statement that really resonated with me. He said that sexual desires are a reminder of our purpose of giving of ourselves to others. I pretty much butchered what he said, but it was more or less like that, okay? A lot of us Christians have the tendency of thinking that because we need to be pure, we have to not accept our sexual desires, and in the end we end up suppressing those sexual desires. But then, you know, by suppressing, instead of helping yourself, you are actually making it worse for yourself. You know, as I said, when you tell yourself, don't think of that pink elephant, what are you gonna think about? When you constantly tell yourself not to feel something or not to think of something, you're gonna feel it or think of it even more intensely. And that's why I believe that we really need to learn how to accept our sexual desires when they come up. Not in the sense that we shall indulge ourselves in it, but in the sense of, oh, look at that, I feel something. Oh, maybe that means that I want to have sex with someone because I feel lonely right now. Something like that. Kind of like become more curious about our feelings and what is behind those feelings. We need to learn how to be more open to our feelings, to really embrace them, to really nurture them. And most especially, we need to learn how to be vulnerable, how to accept others' vulnerability. Our sexual desires are a reminder of our purpose for love and connection. Pretty much that's what our sexual desires are. And how can we really live that purpose if we can't connect with each other through our vulnerabilities? Okay, so the next thing that I believe we need to learn more of within our Christian faith is understanding of sexual addiction. I'm not sure if you have seen the video that I made recently. Maybe some of you came across my channel because of that video, but understanding sexual addiction is extremely important, because I feel that sometimes church leaders, they don't really understand the fact that if you have an addiction, it doesn't mean that you have a purity problem. It means you have a mental health problem. And that can only be addressed and tackled with a mental health professional. I believe that sexual addiction, or any addiction for that matter, it does cover something like a deeper struggle within us. Usually addictions are a coping mechanism to deal with a greater struggle that we may be trying to bury. Since this is a platform where we can all be vulnerable, I will tell you, my sexual addiction was a result of not learning how to deal with my anxiety. For me, the addiction to masturbation was my way of coping, was my way of trying to fall asleep, was my way of trying to soothe my loneliness and my anxiety. If I'm not taught how to understand my feelings and how to manage them and how to help myself in anxious situations, then, well, sometimes you end up finding accidentally a quicker way to kind of fix it. It's kind of like a band-aid fix, really. So now the last thing that I believe we need to be addressing in our Christian faith is to embrace our own humanity. Yes, Jesus came here to save us, and he did command us to, you know, be good people. The thing is, like, we are never going to be perfect. The only perfect people were Jesus and his mother Mary. And I know some of you Christians will contest to the Mother Mary sentence, but look, Jesus Christ was the most perfect person, okay? Let's just agree on that. I just have encountered so many people, and even I experienced this sense that because I am a Christian, I have to be perfect to be worthy of God. I have to be more virtuous in everything, which are virtues are a good thing, but we need to come to terms with the fact that we are human, we are weak, we make mistakes, we commit sins. We will struggle with sin for the rest of our lives, till the day we die, probably. I think in our Christian faith, we need to really teach people how to embrace our humanity. I think the one way we can really learn about that is by really becoming more in touch with God's mercy, becoming more trusting of God's mercy. Because even though we have limitations, God still created us and he loves us, even with these weaknesses. This is more from my personal experience within the Catholic Church, but I feel that sometimes church keeps focusing so much on morals and tradition to the extent that we forget about the reason Jesus came here on earth in the first place, to really share in the mercy of God. And he did so through his passion and death and resurrection. This is the thing. I don't want to sugarcoat the reality of sin, but at the same time, I don't want to paint a picture-perfect frame of this fairy tale ending that once you become Christian, once you give your life to Jesus, then you become a perfect human being. I used to think that way once. I used to think that once I convert, once I decide I will change my life, I will become completely pure, that I would find the Ken to my Barbie and we would ride to the sunset to a very chaste, happily ever after. I can tell you that's not what happened, but I can tell you this. Even though I am still struggling, and I am still imperfect, I am still with limitations, I have found a bit of peace within myself by embracing the reality I live in. The reality that I am not a perfect human being. The reality that I am just a human being. The reality that I commit sins, because it's hard not to sin. But also, I live in this reality where even with my limitations and with my weaknesses, God's love is so much greater because his mercy is abundant. I am a Christian and I still do fall into sin, but I've learned in this past year that I don't need to prove myself. I don't need to prove to others that I am a Christian by trying to achieve the perfection that really doesn't exist in this world. Only God knows my story, where I've come from, where I am at right now. And I am at peace with knowing that even when he sees me as I am, even at this very moment, I know that he embraces me in my entirety. That I am still worthy and I am still loved in God's eyes. So I hope that by sharing this with you, if you are a Christian, you may feel a sense of peace with your humanity. Even if it's not right now, but eventually, God still loves you, honestly. So yeah, that's my rant for today. So if you want to keep this conversation going, comment in the comment section below. Tell me, do you think that we need more informational education about sexuality? Do you think that we need to be more vulnerable with one another? Do you think that perfection is achievable? And if so, how do you do it? Please let me know.